Good afternoon. In next episode of OPOstories about NBA, my guest is Roland Lazenby, a well-known sports writer in Poland. Hello, Roland.
Hi, how are you today?
Very good. And how are you?
I'm great. It's beautiful here in Virginia in the mountains where I live. Springtime is in full bloom, so it's a glorious day.
Yeah, we've got the same. It's the first really hot day here in Poland, northern Poland. So I'm really glad that we've got a spring and we could enjoy different weather. First, I would like to start with books which are well known in Poland. Here we've got the autobiography of Kobe Bryant. The other book is about Chicago Bulls. And the third, last but not least, Michael Jordan. And I'm really glad that I could talk with you about your career as a sports writer and also about books. And maybe let's start with the beginnings. Why you decided to be a sports writer?
It just sort of happened. I had no grand plan to be a sports writer. I had played some college football, a year of college football, which is a big sport in America. And then I went on and played 3 years of college rugby. And I'd always enjoyed playing pickup basketball, but I had no thought about doing anything in sports. I did enjoy writing some, but I really didn't have any plan to be a writer. And so things just transpired. I was a high school wrestling coach and teacher.
Uh-huh.
And I had good wrestling teams. And the local newspaper, this was in Blacksburg, Virginia, in the mountains, not far from where I live today. And I was a 24-year-old varsity head coach, which was unusual. And it was a great experience. But the local newspaper asked me to write about my wrestling team, which had won the first district champion ever for that school. And so I did, and I liked that. And they liked the story and asked me to write others. And so I did that for a year or so. I had been diagnosed with a brain aneurysm in the middle of this. And I was hospitalized for 10 days. They thought I was going to have a bleed and a good chance of dying. And that was explained to me at the start. And I was finally released. They couldn't tell if I had an aneurysm or not. This was in the 70s, so the medical technology wasn't there. I went home and ran 5 miles, felt very good. And so, but in the days and weeks after that, I decided, well, I had this scare. What am I going to do with my life? And I decided I wanted to be a writer, not a sports writer, just a writer. But as it happened, the sports editor at the local paper quit, and they asked me to become the sports editor. So I quit my teaching and coaching job and did that. But I covered football and high school sports. And then I got hired by a bigger paper, a daily. And so there I was not covering sports at all. I was writing feature writing, stories about people. And I enjoyed that. And that led to me getting hired by an even bigger paper, where I was a police reporter covering crime and horrific things. But I continued to play basketball in my spare time. And my father had always been, he and his brothers had been basketball nuts. This is back in the 1930s, when there was a center jump after every basket. One team would score and they would bring the ball to center court and jump the ball and play again. And every time someone scored, they'd have a center jump after every basket. Sort of like soccer, where after every goal, they bring it back to center court and center of the field and kick it off again. And so it was a good thing, but my father got ill while I was working as a night police reporter. He had brain cancer and he died. And I suddenly began playing basketball all the time. His death was a long, hard, difficult death, very emotional. And the way I felt close to him was playing basketball all the time. Well, it so happened that I got accepted into a university writing program that I could do while I was working as a newspaper reporter. So I would go to school at night and I would report during the day now. And I decided to write a basketball book. And I did, and things went very well. And I've sort of spent my whole life. I didn't realize this until I wrote the Michael Jordan biography. But I've sort of spent my whole life paying a tribute of sorts to my old man. And so that's all. There's not much more than that to why I became a sports writer.
And who was the favorite player or team for your father?
My father was from West Virginia, and his favorite player was always Jerry West, who played for West Virginia University and then went to the Lakers. And so in 2010, when I wrote the biography of Jerry West, I put that book on my father's grave.
And is it still on this grave?
No.
So when we look at the books which you wrote, of course, I could divide it into Bulls and Lakers. One of my questions, which I wanted to ask you, but you answered somehow, was why Lakers and Bulls? So I see, and somehow, because of Jerry West, Los Angeles Lakers became maybe not your favorite team, but you focus on the story of the players who played there.
Well, there's a reason for all of this, of course. I also spent 5 years writing the Boston Celtics Green Book, and I've done a number of Boston Celtics projects. And I also did 5 years doing the Pistons Guide, and during the Bad Boys era of the Pistons. And so I wrote a history of the NBA Finals back in 1990 that allowed me to interview all the greats of the NBA. It was a big project, but it really helped me. But the Bulls were obviously big with Jordan, but the Celtics were huge because of their 15 and then 16 NBA championships. And the Lakers were huge because they had their championships dating back to the 1940s. And when you're writing a book, you have to write about things that people want to read. And I suppose I could have started out with a book about the Clippers. But back in that time, the Clippers were terrible. And I went for, I had a book on college basketball do very well. And the publisher said, "What do you want to do?" And so I said, "I want to write about the Celtics." And they loved that. And then the Lakers and the Pistons. And then I got the opportunity to start writing about the Bulls. And it made for great fun. I've seen many great games, enjoyed wonderful experiences doing that. And in this portion of my life, I'm writing the biographies of the great people I witnessed or that I have interest in.
what I really like, because my first book you wrote was Michael Jordan biography. Uh, it was amazing that especially that you're showing the roots, those generation steps which made Michael Jordan. I would say that you're showing his ancestors in the 19th centuries and how he developed the character of the Jordan's family, which create Michael as we know. And what was the most difficult for you when you were writing the book about MJ?
The immense task of it. It was, he has a huge life. It's very complicated. I was exhausted many times over. It's a long book. But I also did the same thing with Jerry West. And he of course, is a white American, and he had a family background of coal miners, of his family came in as one of the wealthiest British families in the colonies when America was a British colony. But along the line, Jerry's great grandfather got kicked out of the family, and they became very poor, what I call dirt scratching hillbillies over in West Virginia, working in the mines and around the mines. And so his family story was intriguing, just as Michael Jordan's was. And the main point of my books is that culture is very big in America. Race is very big in America. Culture is very big across the world. And so my job, I felt, was to fit these basketball greats and their competitive nature and everything they have meant to postmodern society, to fit them into the whole cultural landscape of America. And their backgrounds, their families are, it's part of a saga, a big American story. And that they are huge cultural figures, not just in America, but globally. They are icons because of their competitive nature, because of the growing popularity of basketball. And that's why my Jordan book has been translated into 20 different languages around the globe. One of the very first was Polish, and the Polish people embrace me as a writer. It has been something that is very special to me. And the Kobe book, for example, is in 10 languages. And the Polish publisher, when my Magic Johnson book comes out, will have my Magic Johnson book issued in the Polish language.
Mm-hmm. When you prepare or when you are writing about the Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, I guess that in some way they were similar about the character, the competitiveness, and so on. Which book, if it's possible to say, which book about the Kobe or Michael Jordan was easier to write?
Oh, they both had their own difficulties. They were both very difficult. My sister died the day I finished the Kobe book. I didn't know she was ill. The circumstances in the publishing of that were a very harsh and difficult time in my life. I had a very tight deadline. But I spent a fair amount of time with both men. Kobe, when he was a young player mostly for several years, and Jordan at the end of his career. But as you can imagine, if you're there at the games with a press credential, able to interview all the various people around them and to examine up close the culture of American pro basketball at its highest level with Michael Jordan and then Kobe Bryant. Well, those circumstances for any sports fan or simply any writer would be exhilarating. And so being there was a wonderful, wonderful thing. Translating those experiences and all my research into the large biographies was a big challenge in my life. That you have an emotional relationship with the big challenges in your life. If you're a farmer and you're planting hundreds of acres and fighting all the elements, you have a tremendously emotional experience in doing it. It's difficult and rewarding and devastating all at the same time. That's people in all walks of life experience that kind of emotional relationship with their work, and I'm no different.
Mm-hmm. And do you know maybe how MJ and Kobe react for your book about biographics which you wrote about them?
MJ was friendly. He shook my hand, but that was a very hard book. It had hard, it had wonderful details and hard details too. And the hard details angered him. But there were reasons I felt I had to include them. I did not enjoy it. I did not try to hype the things that I had to include. But he got somewhat angry. Kobe, after years of knowing him well, never responded. But I did get a message just this week. And I've gotten different messages all along, tremendous feedback on my Kobe biography. But one of the people who handled all of his affairs and traveled with him in China and around the globe contacted me just this week and said that he absolutely loved the book, that it was so important to him that he wished that when he was working with Kobe, he had been able to read my book because it really allowed him to understand Kobe. And that's what a biography can do, because a person's life is in order, all the context for every one of their actions. Often when we see these very big public figures, big time athletes, presidents of a country, these huge cultural figures, we only see them in flashes. Media footage, we may see them if it's a player who's playing a game, or we may see them in an interview somewhere. But the biography gives you a chance to provide the full context of their lives, the moments when they're young and when they're forming personality and character, and the context for everything they do is very different from what we witness in media. And that's why I believe biographies are so important.
Mm-hmm. And what did surprise you when you were doing research for the MJ book? Because as you said, MJ tried to get a distance for his life and don't want to show some details which presented him as a human. I talk also with Sam Smith that he got the problems after the Jordan Rules book. And what surprised you when you were looking for the information for your book about MJ?
Well, I think the entire story of his family, and particularly his great-grandfather, Dawson Jordan, whom Michael admired so much, and all the terrible racism and ugliness of America in that era, this man had to come through. He was like the generations. He was like generations of African Americans who their lives were enforced misery and a terrible caste system. And they endured that. There's so many good people who were forced to endure awful circumstances, and they did that. They have continued to do it, and they really weren't allowed to even have an impact on American culture. There was this great white fear that really has driven everything in America. And slowly they've been able to overcome all of that. It has been a huge thing to overcome it. But to the point where they're leaders in so many ways. And the ways that African Americans are stepping into leadership now every day in every sort of circumstance, from technology to science, medicine. It's not just sports and music. A lot of the doors open first in the military and in sports and music, and those doors weren't open very wide. It was still ugly. But eventually education and opportunity became available. It's still very difficult. America is struggling mightily with race. But I think wherever I can help people understand how it was, because most Americans, black or white, don't really want to know about the past. They want to turn away from it and pretend that everything's okay. But the past sets the agenda for where we are right now. And we have to understand that as a culture to move along together. And so it's a big part of Jordan's life, and Jordan is a big part of our lives. And from a cultural standpoint, he is symbolic in so many things that people all over the world care about. The sanctity of competition and competitive spirit and competitive fire and determination and the iron will to win. These great competitors articulate that in very different ways. But those things are important and inspiring to us all.
Mm-hmm. When we look at your bibliography and the topics or players you wrote about, I just can imagine that LeBron James could be another project or the player who would like to write in the future. And when you look at him as a player and also as a person who create his business, his own legacy, do you think that that he will be in the near future the next project of Roland Lazenby?
I have considered that. These biographies are such a big challenge. 7 days a week, years on end sometimes. I'm 68 years old. My wife says, enough on the biography. Find a nice, simple. I have a contract to write another book. Find a nice, simple story and write it. And so LeBron is amazing. I have so much respect for him for so many reasons. And if I were younger, I think I could maybe do that. It is a very complex story. I have just written a very complex story with the life of Magic Johnson. And so in a perfect world, yes, I would probably run out and do a LeBron biography. And I still may, but right now I don't think so.
But if you could imagine the situation when when your wife suddenly told you that, of course, okay, you've got my permission to write another biography, who would be on the top 3 list of the players you would like to describe and write biography from the NBA, past of the NBA, and from present players?
Well, that's a great question. A great biographer once said, if you pick someone to write about, you better like them. You better like spending lots and lots and lots of time with them. To write a biography, you basically give up your own life. You become a ghost in your own life because you're overwhelmed trying to absorb another person's life.
Like with actor.
Pardon?
Like with actor during the film.
Right. Except that it's 700 pages of pressure because people all over the globe are going to consume things and they'll all have different memories of different things. And so it can be, it is pressure filled. I'll just explain it that way. But I think probably Larry Bird would be interesting to me. I've just finished the Magic book. They really stirred together. They really stirred America and then the world in terms of basketball. I thought for a while about doing Jerry Buss, the owner of the Lakers, or Red Auerbach, the longtime GM of the Celtics. I think I'll probably select a book where I can do profiles of people, not full biographies. And I might do 10 men or 10 men and women and just look at the lives. And there's some I've known that I think are very fascinating. And they aren't necessarily big time names. Joe Dumars from the Pistons, a player that I admired tremendously. He had a fascinating life. He came from a fascinating family. And, but, publishers want very commercial projects. They need projects that are going to sell enough copies and gain enough interest. When I wanted to do Magic Johnson was when I ended up doing the Kobe book, and my publisher wouldn't let me do Magic Johnson then. They wanted me to do Kobe first because they were basing their decision on internet data, where the interest was. And so, that's a very tough and complicated question. And I'm just now finishing my Magic book, and I am exhausted. I am worn. I look much older than I am because I have, these books really take it out of me. And so I have some health issues. So I'm not sure. I just can't think really clearly yet there.
I guess that even when you are writing about the showtime and that you could feel the atmosphere of those times, 80s, and in the Los Angeles locker room and so on. And you mentioned about that when you are writing about someone or something, it's good if you like it. And somehow emotionally, probably as a writer, you need a distance, but somehow you are involved with this character. How did you react after Kobe Bryant tragic death?
I was completely stunned. I got a phone call. First I got a text, and then I got a phone call. But first I got a text from George Mumford, who had heard it, the psychologist who is a friend of mine. He lives in Boston, and he texted me. And then I got a call from a family member who said, "You won't believe what happened." And the next call I got was from the BBC. And I ended up doing 29 media interviews in the next 24 hours, something crazy like that. And it wasn't that I'm any important figure. I'm not. But I was someone who was available. When you have a tragedy, you can't just call up the family, or you can't just get a hold of all the top people at the Lakers, or they're processing. And so I went on to do, I don't know how many interviews that week. I was absolutely numb by the time it was over. And that's often the case when you have a very surprising death. We've just had one here in the community where I live. A young person died suddenly, abruptly, in her sleep, and a very popular and admired young person. And it has been so hard going through each day the reckoning, and it really becomes a numbing process. That's part of how many people experience death, especially sudden death of someone they feel they know really well. And so it was numbing, and then it was just monumentally sad. And what a waste. Kobe Bryant was just really coming into who he was going to be as a man. And he was, as I told you, one of his top agents had just read the book recently and messaged me this week. I think I was telling you that and drifted off in another line of thought. But he had told me how much it really helped him to read my book on Kobe. And he spent a lot of time on the road with Kobe. And with all the talks I had with him, I understood that this was a personal loss for him. And 2 years later, he's still grieving. The people who knew Kobe personally and closely, their grieving's ongoing. They're in better stages of it, but there is still very much fresh grief for Kobe Bryant.
Mm-hmm. Also, you mentioned about Joe Dumars, which was one of the main reason why Detroit Pistons got 2 championships, even one NBA Finals MVP. But somehow he is a forgotten star from the 80s and 90s. And on Friday, I talked in my podcast, because part of my podcast is the conversation with NBA Polish fans. And I talked with Polish basketball woman player about The Last Dance and the lack of Scottie Pippen in this document. Of course, The Last Dance was about, and your book, of course, we've got Michael Jordan, who is the main reason why Chicago Bulls got 7 NBA championships. But like here on the cover, the Scottie Pippen is looks like a shadow of Michael Jordan, but a really important shadow. And in your opinion, as a sports writer, does readers are also curious about the stories of not only Batman, but also about Robins?
Yes. The truth of these great basketball teams is that they obviously have to have furious leaders. And of course, Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, LeBron James, Tim Duncan in his way. These leaders provide so much, and of course the coaches themselves are leaders, and there's the leadership, but then there is all that everyone else does. And there was no way. I was just reading, I'm sorry, I should have cut my phone off. I was just reading one of my old notebooks about a conversation I had with John Paxson about the Bulls, and he was going on about all the different things that began to happen. And playing against Joe Dumars and the Pistons really made Jordan become a leader. And playing and Scottie Pippen, it made Scottie Pippen grow up tremendously and become the kind of player who really could take pressure off of Jordan, tremendous competitive pressure, because he had someone there with him who could compete together at that high level, and then they could bring all the other players along. And of course, they had the triangle offense, they had the great coaching. It all was allowed them to dominate. And that's often the story of each of these basketball teams. So they're complicated. It's not one person. It's often one person who sells the tickets. It's often one person who is the star of the film. And I think The Last Dance was an excellent documentary. It wasn't perfect, but none is. And it left out some important people. It left out a lot of important contributions in many ways. And that is the thing about writing a 700-page book. You have all the context of the story. You don't leave people out. Even with a major multi-part series like The Last Dance, which is basically a Jordan biography. It is not the story of one season. It is the story of his basketball life. And it is very difficult to fit it all in. It's why these books are exhausting for me, because a basketball player's life is about so many of the key relationships. And you have to explain why the people are key relationships. There were things that The Last Dance did with Scottie Pippen that were very good. It just did not bring home the point of his greatness and how important he was to the team. It did in some ways. I really have not found a whole lot to be critical of. I know that I had to spend a lot of time with Jerry Krause. He was given short shrift. There were shortcuts taken there. I assume Jordan wanted those shortcuts taken because they didn't tell the full story of Jordan and Krause, which I did in Blood on the Horns, and I did in Michael Jordan, The Life. I think in Poland it's Michael Jordan Zajci. Is the name of that book in Polish. And I can't speak Polish. I have an audiobook for my Jordan biography in Polish. I love to listen to the language. I don't know what they're saying, but it is such a beautiful, beautiful language that it's just so melodious and flowing and powerful.
What is really good in your book about Chicago Bulls to showing the team from different angles, that it's not the one story, there are different stories. The story and rights from the general manager perspective, from Michael Jordan, from the teammates, from coach, because as usually when you've got a group, there are different characters, different aims. And usually we cannot say about one truth. And even the question is there a truth? There are opinions, the ways how they cooperate. And what was amazing in the Chicago Bulls when we look at this team, that they won more than one or two rings. They twice won NBA triple NBA championship, which is a tremendous job. And this Last Dance, it's the dot and dead of this story, but still great, amazing story.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to capture what it felt like to be in those buildings on game night, watching the Bulls play. The Last Dance didn't do a good job of it, but no documentary could capture those special moments just sitting there. And it was fabulous. You know, when I write things, I sort of view it like ancient theater in the round. And what I do is try to pull all these perspectives of all the people looking at, and including the actors on the stage, obviously, their perspectives. I try to pull all those perspectives in, and I use what I call a narrative guide for various parts of the story. It might be Eddie Pinckney, who was trying out for the Olympic team with Jordan on one hand, and it'll be somebody else in some other phase. It'd be Steve Kerr in one phase, and all these different people are the narrative guides. And as we move through the Jordan story, one, it was his youth league baseball coach, two of his coaches, and their view becomes the key reference frame for that part of the story. I'll bring other opinions in, but quite often I'll switch and tell the story from different eyes back and forth as I go through the long narrative of the life of these figures.
I'm also curious about your writing tools and how it was to be a sports writer in the 80s, 90s, and now, because on one hand, we've got now internet, which makes that it's easier to communicate as we could now talk, but also the disadvantages of this tool is that you've got a lot of informations, and many times they are not so on a good quality. But from your perspective, how looks the way you prepare to the book? Is it internet, library, or the other way you gather informations?
Well, the internet's good because it provides me access to newspaper files for stories. It provides me access to interviews I want to listen to from different perspectives. And so those kinds of things are very helpful. But the main thing I think the internet has done is that it has, I did my first internet column for a Fox Sports website back in 1993 or 94. And 10 minutes after the column was posted, I got an email from a 12-year-old boy in Iceland who wanted to talk about the NBA. And so the internet, and it has many, many curses it has brought to humankind. But the internet has also brought many, many gifts and many treasures. And the relationships with readers around the globe, the ability to reach those many readers. I have no doubt that without the internet and without the growth of global knowledge, there's no way my Jordan book would be in 20 languages today. And so I long for the 20th century, but I think that's probably because I'm an old man. I long for the days when I wasn't chained to my telephone. As we've heard this ringing in the background as we talk, it actually is a perfect soundtrack for this conversation. I really enjoyed being a boy and never having a phone. I enjoyed being a young man covering NBA games all over America, driving all kinds of places, never having any kind of navigational aid, just a map and a pencil and figuring it all out. And it never seemed to be any great problem to me. I got to go where I wanted to go. I got to talk to the people I needed to talk to. But in this day and age, we have all those things, and they bring the terrible and the wonderful with them.
Mm-hmm. What I really like in your writing style, that you that there's a line between the past and present, and you try to mix it and show how the past creates the present, and how the history is important for our life. And as you said about the problems which are in United States history, for example, racism, which is in the DNA of your society, your civilization, and it's when we look at last season, NBA season, and the Black Lives Matter. From mine, Polish, white privileged person perspective, it looks many times like the we cannot understand those situations. And when I look at the current situation in the NBA, I see, for example, the Russell Westbrook and his triple-double context, that he now tied Oscar Robertson in this category. And when I look at this, and probably today or on Wednesday, Russell will be the leader in this category, I just create in my mind another book, Roland Lazenby, comparing those two players, different players, but somehow got the similar, the way which they move on the court, to showing the great players, but also the context, how the situation changed, right? We've got Oscar Robertson, who lived in the racism which we cannot even imagine, and Russell Westbrook, who lived in a different society, different civilization, but still with the same problems. And also Oscar Robertson, who lives in the different times with television, only television, and Russell Westbrook with social media. And how is it, do you've got maybe an idea in the past or maybe now about some comparison biography showing two players in somehow different and somehow similar?
I am writing the epilogue of that biography as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so your question is right on the money. It is in fact a wonderful reminder of another of the things I have to address in the epilogue. And so Russell Westbrook is there front and center with Oscar Robertson and Magic Johnson. They are the triple-double guys. Magic Johnson, of course, has the records for triple-doubles in the NBA Finals because he played with Kareem, and they were on so many, and he had so many triple-doubles in the finals. And that is, I mean, amazing triple-doubles games in the finals. And so Russell Westbrook has been there once. And of course, Oscar Robertson won a championship with Kareem. And he went another time with Kareem, but he was not on a team that was good enough to go to make it. And so my ultimate answer is that I don't really make comparisons. They are in their own context. Today's game is very different from the game that Magic Johnson played or that Oscar Robertson played. Today's athletes are very different. Every era has its own challenges. And I'm a writer, and I like to tell their stories. But, and I really work to know their stories. But I don't presume to play God and determine who's the greatest. I think that is a terrible assumption. And now it's fun for fans to do, don't get me wrong. But I think it would be the height of arrogance for someone in my position when these great men have spent years, night after night, doing everything they could, for me to then come in and judge it like I'm judging wine or something, you know. I can't do it. I won't. They each speaks to his own greatness, and I'm very happy they all had the careers they've had and can make their own statements about ultimate greatness.
So the next book we will wait to see in Poland. It will be Magic Johnson biography. Probably if your wife will stick to the decision that it will be the last biography in your sportswriter career. The last question is about your plans when you'll be on retirement after writing books. What do you've got the plans, other plans for, and not writing books?
I may write simpler books. I don't know yet, really. I still have, I'm turning the book in this week, and I still have lots of work. It's 750 pages, 800 pages. It's going to have to get a haircut. It's going to have to be edited down. I'm going to have to be a big part of that. I've got to select all the photos and make all the purchases of those as an author. That's part of my contract. And then sometime next year in 2022, the book will launch, and I'll have to do all the interviews and talk about these questions and others. And only then will I be clear somewhat of Magic Johnson's life and able to have back a bit of my own. For now, I'm going to really work on combing through my research material, getting rid of things, and trying to thin out the massive files and library. And it's just so much information. I've got a lot to do just to. My life has been a storm. Doing one of these books is literally a storm of information, of interviews and readings. And so now I'll begin to sort all that out. Believe me, it takes time.
Sure. Roland, thank you very much for our conversation.
Thank you for the wonderful questions.
Thank you very much. And it was great to talk with you. Your books are really close, as I said, to me. And probably in the future I'll read them again. So have a nice afternoon, and I'm waiting to see soon the story, Magic Johnson story in Poland.
I'm honored by your effort.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.